A funeral turned into chaos when a custody battle broke out. My Aunt Emily was publicly humiliated in front of everyone. So this happened last year, and I swear it felt like something straight out of a bad TV drama. My Aunt Emily, 60, has always been, let's just say, intense. She's the kind of woman who dresses in black velvet for a casual brunch and has an opinion on literally everything. But she's also been a rock for her daughter, my cousin, Sara, 35, who recently passed away after a long illness. The funeral was supposed to be about mourning Sara. Everyone gathered at St. Matthew's Church, which was packed with flowers, incense, and a crowd that was way too big for how small the space was. My family, already complicated, decided this was the perfect moment to rip each other apart. Here's the backstory. Sara had a 10-year-old son, Ethan. He's sweet, quiet, and honestly doesn't deserve any of this drama. Emily wanted full custody after Sara's death. But standing in her way was Sara's ex, David, my cousin's ex-husband, 40. David has been kind of a ghost for years, barely involved, always too busy or working. Suddenly, with Sara gone, he shows up in a brand new suit at the funeral, talking about how he's Ethan's real parent. At first, things were calm. People gave condolences, hugged Emily, and she cried into her handkerchief. I thought, for once, maybe things would stay peaceful. But then David decided to speak. During the eulogy, after the pastor had said his piece, David got up. His voice was all shaky and emotional, and he started with, "Sara was the love of my life, even if things didn't work out." People nodded politely, but then he shifted gears. "And now, as Ethan's father, I will make sure he has a stable life he deserves. I will be taking him home with me." The air in the church went ice cold. Emily stood up so fast her chair scraped across the tile floor. "Over my dead body," she snapped. The whole congregation gasped. Some people tried to hush her, but she wasn't backing down. "You were never there for him," she shouted across the church, pointing her trembling hand at David. "Sara begged you to come to birthdays, to school plays, you never showed up, and now you want to claim him at her funeral." David just stood there, lips pressed together, letting her dig herself deeper. My mom, Emily's younger sister, 55, tried to grab Emily's arm, whispering, "Please, not here, not now." But Emily yanked her arm away. It got worse when David smirked and said, "At least I'm his parent by law." "What are you?" "A bitter grandmother." That line broke her. Emily's voice cracked as she screamed, "I raised that boy while you were off with your fears and DRNK nights." Everyone in the church was staring. Some people were covering their mouths, others were whispering. The pastor tried to regain control, but the damage was done. The funeral had turned into a battleground. And poor Ethan? He was sitting in the front pew, red-faced and crying, watching his entire world shatter in front of strangers. That was just the beginning. After the chaos in the church, people shuffled out like they didn't know whether to offer condolences or just pretend they hadn't witnessed a complete family meltdown. The whispers were deafening. I overheard one woman say, "I came for a funeral, not the courtroom drama." The reception afterward was held in the church basement, those old, fluorescent-lit rooms with foldable chairs and stale coffee. You'd think people would avoid confrontation after what happened upstairs, but no. Emily walked in like a storm cloud, gripping Ethan's hand so tight the kid winced. David followed a few steps behind, making a show of shaking hands with relatives and saying, "I'll be taking Ethan home soon." That set Emily off again. She slammed her paper cup of coffee on the table, liquid splashing everywhere. "You will not take him tonight," she barked. The whole room froze. My mom tried to step in with her peacemaker voice. "Emily, please, let's just eat something. Talk later." But Emily cut her off. "No, he thinks he can just swoop in here, after 10 years of neglect, and take my grandson, over my dead body." David, of course, couldn't resist poking the bear. "The court will side with me, Emily. I'm his father. End of discussion." He said it calmly, almost smug, which somehow made it 10 times worse. Ethan, poor kid, tried to speak up. "Grandma, Dad, please stop." But his little voice was drowned out by grown adults behaving like children. Then my Uncle Richard, Emily's older brother, 63, stepped in. He's usually the quiet one, the type who spends family gatherings nursing a beer and avoiding drama. But he'd had enough. He stood up and said loudly, "David, you've got some nerve. You think you can show your face now and play Daddy of the Year? Where the hell were you when Ethan had pneumonia and was in the hospital for a week? Emily slept in a chair by his bed the whole time. Where were you?" David's face turned red. "That's between me and Sara." "No," Richard snapped. "That's between you and your son. Don't act like you give a damn now." Everyone started talking at once. Some family members took David's side, muttering about how the father has rights. Others stood with Emily, saying she'd been the real parent all along. It was chaos, forks clinking, voices raised, people pointing fingers. The absolute worst moment? When David suddenly pulled out a folded piece of paper from his jacket. He slapped it down on the table in front of Emily and said, "Sara wrote this, that named me as Ethan's guardian, naughty." Emily's face went ghost white. Her hand shook as she picked up the paper, scanning it like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. People leaned over trying to catch a glimpse. She finally said, voice breaking, "She never told me this. She promised it, and then she just broke down sobbing in front of everyone." The humiliation was brutal, her authority, her sacrifices, all dismissed in one move. David stood tall, looking like he already won. But I knew Emily well enough to know she wasn't going to give up that easily. Later that night, the chaos from the funeral and reception had quieted down, or at least people had retreated to corners to gossip instead of yelling. Emily retreated too, dragging Ethan with her to her small, rented guest house near the church. The place smelled faintly of lavender and old books, comforting but not enough to calm the storm raging inside her. She sat on the couch, Ethan curled against her side, and just cried. I sat nearby, unsure if I should speak or just let her release the tension. Finally, she looked up, red-eyed and trembling, and whispered, "I can't believe he did that at her funeral, in front of everyone. I'm humiliated, and it's not even about me, it's about Ethan." Ethan sniffled. "Grandma, he's my dad. I don't want to fight." Emily's hand shook as she brushed his hair back. "Sweetheart, it's not a fight. I just want you safe, and I'll be damned if I let him walk in and claim you like some trophy." That's when I noticed the folder on the coffee table. David had left behind another copy of that guardianship note. Emily hesitated, then picked it up, scanning it again. But this time her brow furrowed. Something didn't sit right. "Look at this, kiddo," she said to me, whispering. "Sara signed it, sure, but the date is 3 years ago, and it was unsigned by a witness. That's not valid." I felt my stomach tighten. Could it be that David had been lying to everyone, pretending he had legal rights he didn't actually hold? Emily leaned back, eyes flashing with a mix of anger and determination. "I'm going to the courthouse first thing tomorrow. I wouldn't let him humiliate me or Ethan again. He thinks he can use a funeral to stage a victory lap, not on my watch." Ethan, still hugging her, murmured, "Grandma, please don't hate him." She kissed the top of his head. "I don't hate him. I hate that he's trying to take what's rightfully yours, that's all, and we're going to fix it." The next few hours were tense. Emily called her lawyer while I comforted Ethan. She scribbled notes, gathered documents, anything she could use to prove she had been Ethan's de facto guardian all along. She refused to eat, pacing instead, muttering, "If he thinks he can make me look weak in front of the whole family, he's got another thing coming." At some point, I realised Emily wasn't just upset, she was strategic. The humiliation from earlier didn't break her, it lit a fire under her. A public spectacle at the church and reception. That was fuel. By the time the rest of the family left the guest house, Emily had a plan forming. She wasn't just going to fight for custody quietly in court, she was going to reclaim her dignity and Ethan, in a way David wouldn't expect. And I knew things were about to get messy. The next morning, Emily stormed into the courthouse like a force of nature. Ethan clung to her hand, looking nervous but trusting. The building smelled of polished wood and old carpet, and the murmur of people waiting for hearings added to the tension. David was already there, leaning against the wall with that smug half-smile he always wore, like he'd already won. Emily didn't even flinch. She held Ethan closer and said, quietly but firmly, "Not today, David, not here." The hearing began. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, glanced at both sides and asked for statements. David stood first, reciting what felt like a rehearsed speech. "I have always been Ethan's legal father. Sara intended for me to have full custody if something happened to her." Emily's lawyer interrupted politely but firmly, pointing out the flaws. The document David presented wasn't properly witnessed or notarized. Emily's face remained composed, but her eyes burned with barely contained anger. Then David did something Emily didn't expect. He smirked and leaned toward the judge. "Your Honour, I just want what's best for Ethan." Emily here, she's overbearing, controlling. He's used to being coddled, not challenged. That was it. Emily snapped. She jumped to her feet, voice echoing in the courtroom. "Overbearing. I raised him for 10 years when you couldn't even send a birthday card. You think this is about control. It's about love, something you clearly don't understand." The courtroom went silent. Asps. Snickers from some of David's distant relatives. I could feel the heat creeping up my neck. People were staring. Emily, my aunt, the dignified, elegant aunt, was screaming in public. David tried to respond, but the judge held up a hand. "One moment, MS. Emily, please sit." She sat chest heaving, glaring at David. But the humiliation lingered. Family members on both sides were whispering and pointing. Someone even muttered, "What a spectacle." Then Emily leaned toward her lawyer and whispered fiercely, "Make them see, make them understand I've been Ethan's parent every day, not him." Her lawyer did exactly that. He presented hospital records, school reports, and photos spanning 10 years of Emily caring for Ethan, helping with homework, taking him to doctor's appointments, celebrating holidays. The courtroom slowly shifted. The whispers turned into murmurs of recognition. People began to realize that Emily wasn't just yelling, she had proof. David's smirk faltered. He looked around nervously as Emily's dedication, her years of sacrifice, and her love for Ethan became undeniable. Even some of his supporters squirmed in their seats. By the time the judge adjourned for a brief recess, Emily sat back, exhausted but determined. She had been publicly humiliated, yes, but now she had everyone's attention, and the narrative was shifting. David, who had thought he could dominate the room with confidence and lies, was starting to crumble under the weight of truth. Ethan, sensing a change, rested his head against Emily's shoulder. "Grandma, I think we're going to be okay." Emily smiled faintly, still flushed from anger and embarrassment. "Yes, sweetie, we're going to be okay, I promise." After the recess, everyone returned to the courtroom. The tension was practically electric. Emily sat with Ethan beside her, still holding his hand like a lifeline. David came back in, looking pale, as if he hadn't expected how strongly Emily had fought back. Then, in a move that shocked everyone, David's lawyer handed the judge a stack of papers. "Your Honour, we have newly discovered emails from Sara just weeks before her death," he said. "They indicate she wanted me to have temporary custody of Ethan until certain matters were resolved." A collective murmur swept through the courtroom. Emily's stomach dropped. She glanced at her lawyer, who quickly scanned the document. These are unsigned, and some are clearly manipulated," he muttered under his breath. Emily, however, didn't wait. She stood up, voice trembling with a mixture of fury and fear, and addressed the judge directly. "Your Honour, this is exactly the kind of manipulation I was afraid of. David is trying to twist my daughter's words to humiliate me in front of everyone and take my grandson." David tried to interject, but Emily cut him off. "No, I will not stand here and let him use a funeral in another courtroom to make me look weak. I've raised Ethan, day in and day out, while he ignored his own son for years. You think sending a few emails changes that? Look at the proof: school records, hospital visits, birthday parties. I was there when he wasn't." The courtroom was silent. Even David's lawyer looked startled by her outburst. People were staring, some in shock, some whispering to each other. Emily's face was red, hair slightly disheveled, but there was no denying her presence. She was fierce, desperate, and absolutely unignorable. Then, in a final act of desperation or maybe revenge, David tried something reckless. He stood abruptly, pointing at Emily, his voice rising. "You think being overbearing makes you a mother figure? You're just better. Sara chose me." That was the breaking point. Emily's eyes blazed. She screamed, loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear, You don't get to speak her name like that. You weren't there when she needed you. You don't get to humiliate me or Ethan ever again. The judge banged her gavel. Order, both parties, sit down immediately. Even though she was scolded, Emily didn't shrink. She sat, still glaring at David like daggers. Ethan clutched her hand, but he also looked slightly relieved. Emily had stood up not just for herself, but for him, and the public humiliation, the screaming, the confrontation, had all shifted the room's perception. By the end of the hearing, it was clear Emily's determination and evidence outweighed David's shaky claims. Courtroom tension hadn't disappeared, but now the momentum was unmistakably in her favour. As they left the courthouse for a brief break, Emily whispered to me, exhausted but resolute, "I may have looked like a mess back there, but no one will ever question how much I love him or how far I'll go to protect him." Ethan nodded, hugging her tightly. "I know, Grandma, I know." The final hearing came a week later, and the courtroom felt like a pressure cooker. Emily arrived early, dressed in a dark navy suit that was far more subdued than the black velvet of the funeral, but her presence was just as commanding. Ethan clung to her side, clutching her hand like it was the only anchor in a storm. David walked in with the same smug confidence, but this time it faltered slightly when he saw the room packed with family members quietly supporting Emily. The whispers from the previous hearings had amplified. Relatives who had been neutral were now openly observing, some even shaking their heads at David. The judge called the session to order, and Emily's lawyer immediately presented a meticulous timeline of events, photos, school reports, medical records, and even testimonials from neighbours and teachers who had watched Emily raise Ethan for years. It was overwhelming evidence. Then came David's last-ditch effort. He tried to read from another email supposedly from Sara, claiming she wanted him to have more involvement with Ethan. Emily's lawyer calmly objected, and the judge allowed it, but the room tensed. David smiled, thinking he had one final ace. Emily rose, her voice steady now, but every word packed with emotion. "Your Honour, I'm not standing here to attack David. I'm here for Ethan. He is 10 years old, and he deserves stability, love, and the grandmother who has been his caretaker every day of his life. Any document or email claiming otherwise is manipulated, taken out of context, or incomplete. This is not a battle of wills. It's about protecting a child from being pulled into a power struggle at the cost of his well-being." David's face flushed as murmurs spread across the courtroom. People leaned in, sensing the truth behind her words. Even his own family looked uneasy. Then, in the most dramatic moment, Emily's lawyer handed the judge a stack of letters from Sara written in the last year of her life. They weren't legal documents, they were personal letters, almost like journal entries. In them, Sara expressed repeatedly how much she trusted Emily with Ethan, how she relied on her for guidance, and how she wanted her son to remain with Emily if anything happened to her. Emily held Ethan close, her eyes glistening. "This is the truth, this is love, not words on a manipulated piece of paper. Ethan knows me, he trusts me, and I will protect him no matter what." David's face went pale. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He tried to argue, but the judge had seen enough. "It is clear to this court that Ethan's best interests are with his primary caretaker. Custody is granted to Ms. Emily, effective immediately. Mr. David will have supervised visitation until further arrangements can be made, and only if deemed appropriate." The room erupted in quiet applause. Emily sank into her chair, tears streaming down her face, but there was relief and triumph mixing. She had been humiliated publicly, yes, shouted at, undermined, and mocked, but she had reclaimed her dignity, and more importantly, she had secured Ethan's future. Ethan, still clinging to her, whispered, "Grandma, you did it." Emily smiled, exhausted but victorious. "Yes, sweetie, we did it, together." And just like that, the nightmare that began at a funeral ended with justice, love, and a hard-won victory that the scars of public humiliation would linger in memory forever. After the custody ruling, the tension in the family slowly shifted, though the aftershocks of the funeral and courtroom drama lingered. Emily and Ethan returned to her home, which suddenly felt like a sanctuary instead of just a guest house. The air smelled faintly of the lavender Emily always used, and for the first time in weeks, Ethan laughed without hesitation, building a small tower of blocks on the living room floor. The family gatherings, however, were another story. At the first post-ruling dinner, my mom tried to ease the atmosphere. "Everyone, let's just enjoy tonight. No arguments, please." But David couldn't help himself. He sat across from Emily, stiff as a board, muttering, "You think this is over?" Emily's eyes flashed, but she stayed calm. "It's over as far as Ethan's safety is concerned. Your attempts to humiliate me are nothing to him, and nothing to me, either." Her calm confidence shocked everyone at the table. Even Richard, Emily's older brother, leaned over with a small smirk. "You heard the judge. Court's done. Crying and screaming. A funeral doesn't change reality, but apparently, raising the kid does." David didn't respond. He kept picking at his salad, his pride wounded. Some distant relatives whispered about how ungraceful Emily had looked during the funeral and hearing, but even they couldn't ignore the mountain of evidence in the judge's ruling. Emily had turned humiliation into triumph. The real victory was Ethan. He finally spoke up during dessert, timidly at first. "Grandma, thank you for fighting for me. I don't want to live anywhere else." Emily squeezed his hand, tears forming in her eyes. "You never will, sweetheart, I promise." The aftermath also revealed unexpected alliances. Some of David's family quietly approached Emily, apologizing for the embarrassment and admitting they hadn't realized how much she had done for Ethan. Emily, always gracious in victory, nodded and said, "Thank you, let's keep this about the kid, not grudges." Emily's own friends and neighbours sent letters, flowers, and supportive messages. Even strangers who had caught snippets of the viral local news coverage reached out, offering congratulations. Public humiliation had left scars, yes, but it had also highlighted Emily's strength, resilience, and unwavering love. Months later, life settled into a new rhythm. Ethan attended school, played soccer, and came home to Emily's nurturing care. David had limited visitation, as determined by the court, and over time, he slowly accepted the reality. The courtroom chaos became a story that was retold in hushed tones at family gatherings, an infamous tale of public humiliation turned into a heart-won triumph. One quiet evening, Emily and I sat on the porch, sipping tea. I never thought I'd be dragged through hell in front of half the town, she said, voice soft but reflective. But I also never doubted I protected, and sometimes humiliation is just fuel to fight harder. I nodded. You didn't just fight, Aunt Emily, you won. She smiled, tired but victorious. Yes, we won. And in that moment, with the sun setting and Ethan's laughter echoing from inside the house, the nightmare of public humiliation faded into a memory, one that strengthened Emily, cemented her role in Ethan's life, and reminded everyone that love sometimes demands courage in face of the world's eyes.